Let's get started with the meeting. How about we, hold on. I thought I was ready. Have so public, looks like we have public comments today, right? It's okay with you. I want to switch things around. Just maybe we'll do public comments first. That way we'll have to stay for the rest of this discussion, unless you want to, which would be great. And then we only have one thing on the agenda, which is the policy about the residency trips, right? So hopefully a simple meeting. Shall we start with introductions first, and then we'll move on to public comment. Start over with.
Sure. Terry Proctor, Communications Department.
Oh, we'll go this way.
Yeah.
Kojo Hakam, Harrison Park Middle School, Mandarin Immersion, 6, 7, and 8.
Matt Bacon-Brennis, Mount Tabor, Japanese dual language immersion, 6 through 8.
Patty Sullivan, board member.
Eddie Wong, board member, chair.
Yuki Sakai, Mount Tabor Middle School, Japanese dual language, 8th grade.
Christine Halsey, I'm the parent of a 7th and 9th grader in the JDLI, the Japanese program, and I'm on the board of the Oyamakai parent organization that supports the program.
I'm Kelly George. I have a 5th, 8th, and 10th grader in the Mandarin Immersion program, and I'm the chair of Shu-Ren that supports with Mandarin Immersion at Woodstock Harrison Park in Cleveland.
Yes. Hi everyone, I'm Will Flores and I'm the Director of Multilingual Services.
Hi everyone, I'm Christina Howard and I'm the Interim Chief Academic Officer.
Hi, this is Cheryl Proctor. I'm the Deputy Superintendent.
Roseanne Powell, Board Manager.
Kara Bashaw, Executive Assistant.
Jay Viano, Chief of Student Support Services. John Franco, Chief of Schools.
I'm Michael Sunleitner, former trustee at BCC, recently retired from there, and a long time ago co-founder of Da Vinci Middle School. That's great.
I'm Kimmy Garrison, and I'm with the War Resisters League, and I do counter recruitment in the high schools.
Herschel Soul with War Resisters League. John Gresham with War Resisters League.
Thank you. We have people sign up for comments.
We do. Michael Sonleitner.
And just a reminder, because I'm sure you heard this plenty of times, 3 minutes, I think 2-minute warning, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Please forgive me for misspelling your name.
No worries.
Even if it's typical, it's not right. Today, I would like to speak relating to JROTC budget bad and low demand. How is that relevant to student success? To me, it's obvious that student success requires funding of key programs. Key programs now are in danger of being less funded because of the budget shortfall that you're all facing. It's painful. To consider JROTC being added at this point is simply not very reasonable in that context. Here I point out how there is typically a bait and switch when it comes to Pentagon support for JROTC instructors. That is, they might pay in the first year and then have you pay in the second and thereafter. Second, it's financially a net loss. There's a lot of documentation on that. You can see that I cite sources. It's just mathematically the case. It doesn't pay for itself. So the money is going to have to come from somewhere, from the district budget. Second, there's a lost college transfer opportunity cost, and I detail that. This has led several districts in California to end JROTC in favor of either college transfer, additional sections of courses, or actual career technical education courses that prepare people for jobs. On the back side, you'll see that I point out how JROTC is a low demand at most schools. And that relates to a number of factors, but it also relates to, again, the needing to staff in library staffing, counseling, arts, music, other things that actually excite students and keep them in school, and have been statistically shown to increase retention from year to year, and of course, graduation. Look carefully at the other arguments. Time flies when you're having too much fun. The last one I think might be of special interest, relating to there not having been adequate input into this proposal, and how I suggest input could be found. It would require time beyond May 7th. So at the very least, it would require a tabling of the motion. Thank you so much.
John Gresco?
I'm John Gresho, and I work with the War Resisters League here in Portland. It has been said multiple times that JROTC is not for everyone. It is just about providing students with options. In fact, struggling students, kids from poor families, black and brown kids, many of these kids are going to be steered toward JROTC, perhaps informally by well-meaning or pro-military counselors and teachers. Or perhaps JROTC will just appear on certain students' class schedules as a requirement. Many school districts do this to keep JROTC from being under-enrolled, as is revealed in a New York Times article titled, "Thousands of Teens Are Being Pushed into the Military's Junior ROTC." In either case, both parents and students will have been misled into believing that JROTC is elective. At the last regular school board meeting where the JROTC proposal had its first reading, comments made in favor of JROTC by a board member really triggered some of the veterans in the audience, some of the veterans in attendance. That's because they know it's all based on a big lie. Military recruiting is all about telling young folks just what they want to hear, about half-truths and false promises. And JROTC, despite claims to the contrary, is all about military recruiting and military training. It is not about leadership training, it is about following orders. It is not about learning life skills, it is about being a quote-unquote good soldier. It is not about critical thinking or about a free exchange of ideas. It's about indoctrination and a curriculum out of the 1950s that exalts military adventurism and puts down progressive social change. If JROTC is such a motivating and inspiring program, then why are so many school districts making it mandatory for struggling students? I'll tell you why. It's because these students who are skipping and failing their regular classes are also skipping JROTC classes. I know you have heard from selected students from outside Portland who think that JROTC is a great program. That's no surprise. Every program, good or bad, has its fans. And I've also heard board members say, don't decide this for students, just give them the option. But if you would take the time to poll PPS high school students, I am fully confident that most students would not favor JROTC in their schools or on their class schedules.
Thank you.
Includes who we have signed up for today.
Great. Great. Thanks for coming and sharing. All right. So moving on to our agenda item. The goal here today is to, when the issues that's come up, right, is that we have the DLI residency trips and with the policy as is, which was, the aim of the policy was to, to protect all students, but at the same time, one of the things that we face right now is that it, like a lot of rules, I believe needs exceptions because obviously it hasn't been working out for a few groups, right? One of the things I do want to put out there, this is the goal today is to come up with a list of recommendations to bring to the policy committee to revisit this policy. I don't know if everyone here had a copy or was able to access it. It's uploaded in board books. Policy number, sorry. So I'm trying to figure out how to use this.
Where would it be?
It should be, yeah, 6.50.010 dash P.
Where would we look for that?
It's in, I don't know, where would people not in board books get it?
It's in
Board book,
yeah.
okay.
Public can see it.
Oh, on the board web page, it's the link to the materials.
Is that accessible from inside PPS?
Yes. That's what.
You help us.
Oh.
It's PPS.net.
All right. So.
Yeah.
You find
It's
it?
not actually a. It's just a public page.
Board.
Mhm.
Okay.
Hit meetings. And then hit today's.
Thank you.
So I think what we're going to start doing is kind of, I don't know how many people are, I assume most people are at least somewhat familiar with the policy to kind of, to start with the policy itself and start workshopping it, right? What that means is that looking at the policy, trying to figure out what parts is sufficient, what parts are perhaps causing some problems, or maybe there's some gaps in defining definitions. Kind of a quick review as the way things kind of work in general in government and in governmental bodies. We have policies, which is basically kind of defines like the big overarching what, right? Like what is the goal, what is what. And then from that comes administrative directives, which is basically describing how the policy is executed. So that's why the administrative directive is also uploaded into board books. And the administrative directive comes from this policy. So if the policy is changed, if we propose certain things to the policy committee and successfully change it through the board, the AD, if there's any conflicts in the AD, the administrative directive, that would also have to be changed or rewritten. So I think this came out of a suggestion from staff because it was a situation where in terms of trying to enforce the policy, staff's hands were tied and really didn't feel like there was much leverage and flexibility in what they could do. So by going by the policy route, it would change the dynamics of that. At the same time, I think it's also important to make sure that we prioritize kind of one of the reasons this policy was put in place, right? Which is the protection of the kids who are not going on these trips. And this is actually, I think, is a good area also to have discussion in as well, because I feel like both the groups here that are represented today have done a lot of work in addressing that situation. So, that's about as much talking as I want to do right now. I want to kind of open it up to see if people have ideas about where we can look for, or in terms of this policy, what are some sections or parts that we could consider?
Should we kind of just get it down
Yeah.
paragraph by paragraph?
Well, I think the part that sorry, I highlighted it, but I don't think it saved it. part that I think is causing the trouble, right? The administrative directive where it has the limit, the 5-day limit for missed school days. And for the Japanese program, that doesn't work very, very well because, it's trying to go over spring break. This Japanese schools are not in session during spring break. For the Mandarin program, it's also, well, just in general for all teachers, because this is a yearly thing, it's not fair to ask teachers to always miss their spring break every year, right? That's so, like, for example, so some thoughts I had were looking at the policy, for example, in here. I'm trying to figure out which number it is. The one that is protecting, for example, the effects on the students who are not going, right? And that's where the 5-day limit comes in. But so some ideas I have is we could potentially redefine what exceptions could be made if certain protections were put in place. Like, for example, if meaningful effort was put in place to accommodate students who are not going, then that would provide an exception. And yeah, thoughts on that?
Or if it's something that's every year.
Yeah.
Sort of not really required, but expected anyway.
Right.
Yeah, I've got, so in the principal coffee with Principal Dickey last week, she mentioned that there's funds that are going to be coming to the 8th grade classes, and I believe it's district-wide, for an 8th grade, I'm not going to call it the right thing, but an 8th grade academic experience, essentially, I believe is what it was. And I asked her, I said, would this be an opportunity to be able to utilize those funds to create a capstone for the non-DLI program that could be traveling potentially at the same time? And she said that that's what she was really hoping for.
Okay.
If Yuki has a moment, Mount Tabor just completed their first non-DLI capstone this year. You can say a few words about that.
Definitely. So there's actually a couple different kinds of students who are not going, those who are internal to the dual language program, and that exists in all of our programs, I think. A kid or three who chooses, for whatever their personal reasons, not to participate, they get the same assignment. And I know I can speak to Mount Tabor where we, for the language aspect and the cross-cultural aspect, we hook them up with Japanese-speaking parents, native Japanese parents,
Okay.
and have them schedule interviews so that they can do that. It's not the same, but it is still meaningful.
Okay.
Then there are the students outside of the DLI, and I'm not sure if this is necessarily who is intended to, this policy was intended to kind of make whole. But yes, at Mount Tabor, every single 8th grader is now getting a research residency experience. This last one was just to Pendleton. I heard it was very successful, as I mentioned. I saw the kids get off the bus, and I've never seen that many happy 8th graders all in one spot. They did, it was similar in structure where they did field studies, they had outings, they were based in a lodging. They went into small groups and they did various things kind of semi-independently with chaperones.
Okay.
So very similar to the structure of the dual language research residencies.
What numbers of students were partaking in?
Numbers.
Generally, percentage of the school, 8th grade.
I think it was the whole 8th grade.
It was
wasn't
the whole 8th grade with only a
Yeah, I
few who did
remember when they were
not.
planning it, I happened to be there.
Oh, I see.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they just wanted to make sure that the whole 8th grade had
Yeah.
that chance.
We have a question for you. Our camera is frozen right now. And
It's just on me.
Question is, do you want to leave it frozen for the meeting or do you want to take a break while he resets it?
How long is the break?
3 minutes. I just need to power off and power off. It's not tracking people right now like it usually does. So
Okay. Is that okay, Vote? Just 3-minute break?
Sure.
That's fine.
I'm gonna
Alright.
go get a drink of that.
There you go. Yeah. And I'm going to figure out where did my highlights went.
it's just a moment.
I guess we could all use a break. The camera had our backs.
Well,
We can, let's ask.
Hey, if I could just speak a little bit about it. I was involved with the students who did not go on outdoors, kind of how the building managed that, because I think that's part of the question and the original. What happens academically for the kids that don't go, because there were absolutely, I taught the ORR. General concern, that's something that we want to address. The kids in-house, we definitely have a project, and that's been day one from 20-some.
I just got back. I had three students who didn't go, were in-house, were working on their two capstone projects.
I think what the policy was for.
We're good to go again.
Okay. All right, shall we resume the meeting?
Thank you.
Yeah, let's see if we can go back to what you're saying. Can I ask really quickly, what, I think, maybe especially if we're trying to tackle the policy, right? What specifically defines a capstone? What does it make it different than, say, just a project?
Well, please, go ahead.
So what makes it different from a typical field trip?
No, just in term, or like final project, or something that I guess what I'm looking for is, if we're trying to, policy is a rule, right? And humans are crazy beings. We always have to make exceptions. So if we're trying to figure out an exception or a caveat or something like that, right? Maybe there's something in what defines a capstone that could lead us to creating some kind of exceptional language. Does that make sense?
I think so. I guess the way I capstone is a way to finish 3 years of middle school with a bang versus and trying to struggle to come to the desk, to the table, to the classroom to learn. And so certainly a capstone project that involves that kind of, it feels very logical to me to be a Japanese or Mandarin program or Vietnamese program, to take that to the place where obviously the language and the culture are the essence of the place. And so the capstone project, in my mind, is something that is beautiful, powerful, because kids are literally till the end of the school year putting the pieces, the reflection, the stories, the research that they have done. It's very powerful in that they've done it firsthand. It's powerful in that it is their own creation and direction. There's a lot of agency that is promoted in a project-based experience. I would argue that it does not have to be, for our program, I think we should go to Japan. But I don't think that has to be for other students. I mean, I think the Pendleton experience, it's in its infancy. They just they pulled it off this year. But there was a lot of seeing and touching and experiencing themselves that then is going to be parlayed into a final project for 8th graders at Mount Tabor that are non-JD. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. I mean, it's if you look at the research around project-based learning, done well with good scaffolding and chunking and a lot of student input, the results are enduring. Very kids in our programs. I'll speak for our program, but I'm guessing it's true for these other programs, when they come back and report that it was one of the most academically rigorous and
Okay.
delight or enjoyable experiences too. So it's it combines relevance, rigor, realness.
Relationships.
Yeah.
Like
Dr. Wong.
Yeah. Sorry.
I think it would be good. Hey, everybody. Sorry, Chief. So I'm sitting back here, voted up to the table. So I think it'll be good because I know the purpose is really kind of talk about policy, which makes sense, right? So remember, there are kind of two pieces here. There's policy, and then there are admin directives, right? And so the policy the board sets, the admin, the ADs, staff set, right, based on policy. So the whole idea of the AD is to get a little bit more refined and defined on what that actually means. And so just to give you, I think I don't know if we're all aware of the historical context of this, right? In terms of there was a complaint that was issued, public complaint, formal complaint, 2019. And specifically around students that were left behind and the continuity of instruction. And so the board had, and that went to, there was an addendum or a policy adjustment. And if you actually look at the policy, it's in the district sponsored activities number 2. And so I'm just saying what changed in reference to what it was before. So I know there was a piece about workshopping the policy. And Roseanne, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the number 2. The district staff responsible for overseeing extended travel must notify building admin in advance of the trip so that the plans for continuity of curriculum instruction can be assured for students remaining on campus. Those plans will be communicated to the school community and observed so that no disruption in curriculum programming will occur for students remaining on campus. So that was the distinct change before. But just wanted to make sure that we're all kind of level setting, in terms of how this came about.
And it means the students remaining on campus who are in the program and out of the program, right? And particularly, I understood it was people who were out of the program, who might, and I don't quite know how they would be left out,
And that was
how that works.
and that was the complaint, was how that impacted the students who were, from just the amount of students gone and the time they were gone. So,
Yeah.
Because they would, so they wouldn't have been in a Japanese or a Mandarin class. It just would have been that somehow they were disrupted because of the trip, right?
I think at the time it was, remember the complaint was that there was, instruction was sort of stalled for the other non-language classes. It was, we're gonna kind of slow down until your peers get back, was sometimes the practice, which was one of the things that has been corrected, right?
Yeah, and I understood that had been corrected. That was noticed and changed.
So I just think it's important that we all understand
and
where this came from.
And I think it's also, sorry, just going, I think Colleen just said, I think it's also important to center that if we are going to add or change or suggest changes for success, if we're looking at trying to be successful and change this policy, I think we really do need to center that, the heart of that complaint, so that it is addressed and figure out how to add changes that center that as well. I think that would increase our chances of success mostly. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Feel you need a little more context to that context. I mean, if you want to share from the Japanese side, and I
Sure.
So,
Oh, you want me to share?
yeah.
Context about what Dr. Franco just mentioned?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I know a lot of the detail of that complaint and the individual who submitted it. And I guess I'm not sure how much we want to dive into that detail and that context. You know, I think there was a managerial issue and with an administrator and not asking a classroom teacher to continue on. The thing that I think that was the context that always comes up for me is that, as far as I know, that complaint was never investigated. It was never verified that I know of. And none of the teachers, none of my colleagues That complaint came out of Mount. And not one of my colleagues was spoken with about that. It was my assumption, it was that it was assumed that it was accurate. I don't know if it was accurate. I'm not sure it's ever really verified. So that's the context behind that. And what I know is that I've heard to the contrary that a number of teachers, who I went and interviewed, said that actually it was the other way around in terms of like education got easier and better because they were able to do things with smaller numbers in the classroom. And the units or the instruction did not stop or did not slow down. In fact, it got richer. And so that was what in my limited research, what emerged. I think it is to give it that kind of power, that particular complaint, that kind of power, without looking into what actually happened. It feels a little bit wrong from our perspective. And at the same time, Eddie, I really do think making sure that that's clearly in their policy, I think it's still really important, regardless of whether that complaint was verified or not. And I think it's important that we walk out of the classroom, any of us teachers walk out of that classroom, whether it's for a day sub or for a 2-week excursion like this, that absolutely that there's stuff that is valuable, that is meaningful for those students who remain. So
I'll say as a parent of an 8th grader who just traveled, all of the prep meetings that the parents attended, the students were told multiple times over, the parents were told multiple times over, your child is responsible for anything that happens while they're gone. It's not going to wait for you. So when you come back, either you get it done before, or when you come back, you have to make up that work. And that was very clear to the students, and it was very clear to the parents as well. So
You got it notarized, right?
we had to complete a notarized agreement about student behavior and basically making up that work. So we went to the bank to notarize it, and they're like, "Oh, is your kid going to Taiwan too?" I've had like 3 of these today. So it was very serious to the students and to the families that your kid is responsible for making up this work. It's not going to be waiting for you. They're not going to be playing while your kid's in Taiwan. They're going to be carrying on.
I just want to add on to what Michael's talking about. Matt, sorry. Since 2008, we've never had one complaint in the Mandarin immersion program. Teachers or families of students who were left behind. It never happened. In fact, we had a lot of support from the teachers and staff. And they knew what was at stake, and they embraced it while we were gone as well. So, exciting.
Well, and I would also say that a lot of the teachers I work with, what they to this day still do is they don't create a separate unit that they teach with the students who stayed home and the ones that go. They often have something that is project-based that can be done in the context of Japan or can be done in the context of Portland. For example, a language arts teacher does a cross-cultural, cross-generational interview. So the students have to do that in Japan, and then the students that remain here have to do it here. So I guess when I go back to that managerial issue, I think there was maybe it's because policy wasn't clear enough, I don't know. But I do think that that's something that can be done well. We just had, as Yuki mentioned, we had about half the 8th graders, non-JDLI, go to the Oregon Research Residency. Simultaneously, we had all the 6th graders, not all. There's always students who opt out, families who opt out. So Yuki and I, among others, were responsible for teaching those students, some of those students. I found it a great context in which to support students in their own work. I had a class of 7, had a class of 6. Those were great opportunities to develop relationships and connections and teach. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I think we can go in circles arguing. I mean, earlier, Matt, when you pivoted and talk about like, yeah, we should really identify how to help or assure that students who are not going on a trip are protected. I think that's a pivot I think we want to do, because whether the source of the original complaint, the background, I don't think that's even relevant right now, because I think the spirit of this policy is district-wide protection, right? We're protecting all the kids from future abuses of using field trips and stuff like that, right? So I think our pivot away from that, we don't have to relitigate that, but moving on, right? So I have 2 questions. One is, I assume that it's the number 2, Dr. Frango, that you pointed out, right? Section 1.2, which is what in the AD that came up with the 5-day limit, right? That was the attempt to protect what it says here, students remaining on campus. So my suggestion, I feel a little awkward too, because this is going to be my first time recommending policy change. So I'm excited. But at the same time, I'm also really conscientious of trying to make this work. If you see in section, is there any way we could post it on the screen? Not everyone has access
That'd
to
be
it.
helpful.
Because otherwise, I don't feel like I don't want to read it like reading hour.
Do it. Here, take it. Kara, you will do it.
Hey, just 1 second.
Okay, while you're doing that, I'll just
Policy, not the 80, right?
Yeah, the policy. So I'll just read it thanks, Kara, for putting it up there. I'll just read it so everyone knows. But my idea is that we could, section 3 has ABC, 2 doesn't have ABC, we could add an ABC. So it says district staff responsible for overseeing extended travel must notify building administrators in advance of the trip so that plans for continuity of curriculum and instruction can be assured for students remaining on campus. Those plans will be communicated to the school community and observed so that no disruption in curriculum or programming will occur for students remaining on campus. So
that doesn't say anything about limiting time.
It's an AD.
So,
No.
so it was the administrative
That's an
directive
admin directive.
that went from there, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
They took it from there.
So it's less of a policy change that we're looking for and more of the
It's more-
administrative
yes,
directive
thank
that
you.
we.
It is.
might
And actually, I do
have.
think, to Matt's point, we're thinking about the broader context of the district. I mean, number 2 is good. Like, to me, that is, we absolutely need to be doing that piece. I think the question is, right, more the admin directive. And so, I mean, I didn't write it, but we'll have a hand in, obviously, potentially rewriting it. And so I do have like a series of questions that I would like to ask. Because it goes a lot deeper than just the length of time. And I was a middle school principal in Newburgh, and we had a Japanese exchange program to Wadayama, Japan. This is not something that I don't disagree with at all. But at the same time, I'm very cognizant about the kids who are there. And so that piece around ensuring or assuring that continuity instruction is so important. Again, that's back to your point, Director Wong, that's what we need to center, right? And how that actually looks. Because we could present anecdotal pieces all the time. I don't have a good, clear enough picture of consistency across to make sure it's actually accurate. But if we can ensure that level, then that's obviously a step, right?
yeah, I would agree with that. I think would something like for 2, we could suggest an A. If reasonable steps have been taken to ensure continuity for the students remaining behind. For example, what I'm trying to do, so if we want to change the AD, from my understanding, it would have to be some kind of change in the policy, right? And that it would respond to the AD accordingly.
Is that true?
Or is the policy okay and it's the AD that we need to change?
Contradict the policy.
Okay, yeah.
So it could be 10-day trips are permissible in the directive, the AD. And even given this current verbiage, is that right?
AD's downstream, in other words.
Yeah.
How do you change AD?
So I mean, this is kind of like the crux of the issue, right? There are, I think, multiple ways to change the AD. It could be through a board resolution, I assume, right? It could be through a change in policy. It could be.
The board doesn't approve ADs.
Yeah, well, exactly, unless it was directed somehow. I'm just throwing this out there, or it's a line added to the policy where the AD has to be adjusted to. From what I understood, that was kind of our best option in terms of creating a long-term fix, right?
Or the conversation here could help inform a recommendation to change an AD. Something.
Okay, how about, could we do both?
What do you mean both?
So, like I had, in terms of the policy, like for example, my idea was adding an ABC, like for example, like if reasonable measures have been taken to assure continuity of education for the students on this trip. And B, limitation or, these programs represent, rigorous academic opportunities. And C, also, because it's a yearly thing, also could, limitations could present certain hardships that are untenable, then an exception can be made under review of, you see where I'm going?
Yeah.
I mean, my only question would be, in my mind, the AD already contains the language to permit this longer than 5-day travel. And it comes in the word exceptional. I believe that's in the AD. I may have that wrong, but pretty sure it's in there because we talked about it extensively, or we wrote about it extensively to Margaret Calvert about asking for that exception. The argument back to us was we weren't exceptional because because we do this every year, and I said that's exactly why it's exceptional. We offer this exceptional experience to our kids, our culminating experience to our kids.
And I think that's where the calibration around what exceptional is, because one could also argue that exceptional, because it's done annually, is not really exceptional because you can plan for it, right? As opposed to, an OSAA state competition where you don't know if you're going to go because it just depends on whether or not you qualify. That, to me, because you can't front load for it, is an exceptional case. So it just really depends on how much. That was the spirit of the exceptional language. Not to say that's not an exceptional trip, absolutely, but that was the spirit of the exception. And so the specific language in it's not AD, but again, I think to Roseanne's point, to me, it's not a change in policy. It's my opinion, because it clearly outlines the adjustments that were made in number 2 about adhering to and assuring that, that instruction is the continuity of instruction, right, and inclusion. So it's really about how do we ensure that is actually taking place? And then there are other pieces, just questions overarchingly that I have, because I think if we're going to change something like in the AD, like let's change it for the better overarchingly, for all the kids. That's just that's my perspective.
I think that's a good idea. So my question is, how do we change the AD?
Well, again, so that would be like, again, to me, since the AD is really staff created based on the policy, it's just garnering more insights. Like, for example, the overarching question is, how can we, that I've raised to this group is, how are we ensuring that continuity of instruction? Right? Because in the AD, it's very specific. One of the pieces was, well, you can't go for more than this many days unless it's an exceptional case. That was an avenue to get to that point, right, of ensuring continuity of instruction. But so that's just an example, I would say, right? And so that's a question I would pose to the group: is how are we ensuring that that's actually going to happen without putting. So for example, if you approve a trip because the AD says no more than 5 days, upwards of 20. So say you take a trip for 20 days, how are we assuring that continuity of instruction for, say, again, you take it to one extreme for like 20 days. That's again, just posing it to the group.
Is it worth exploring kind of ways to categorize a little bit? Here's the general policy. In this case, if it's an international trip that goes over 8 time zones, you have this much flexibility to go up to 10 days, for example. If it's this kind of build in some
That's what I was
categories of because there's I don't know, my impression is that a language immersion program in particular requires a certain amount of time, and I believe there have been studies on this, for kids to really get immersed in the language. It's less of a cultural tourism kind of thing and more kind of getting used to using the language. And there's a period of time that they need in order to kind of let that sit in. And so that to me is a sort of a different category that academically would require a little bit more time. Not to mention the travel time, that's a whole different thing. But I just feel like we could define things in ways that that would allow other programs and other schools to take advantage of, in a good way, of these categories that we put in, and maybe have a little more flexibility with their own offering. It might be a little simpler than trying to rewrite the entire thing. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Kind of.
You're talking about the AD?
I'm talking about the AD, yeah.
And when you say categories, can you give me an example? I mean,
So there's different, there's a couple of different ways you can look at it. I focus on the language immersion part because that is kind of the background that I come from and that I'm interested in for my kids. And so I know, having experienced language immersion programs and from reading studies or about studies, that when you go on a trip to really fully immerse yourself in the language, it takes a few days to kind of get your feet under you. It takes a little bit of time to kind of grow into it, and by the end of it, it's kind of like this, you get the full experience. You can't always do that in 5 days. So I'm thinking, like, if you had a category that was, I'm trying to think how to make it broad enough that it isn't just for language program or for our particular program, something to make it applicable across the board. But you have programs that require more time for subject matter. Yeah, for subject matter reasons. That's not a really eloquent way.
I know what you're trying to say.
Like immersion is not something you can rush like a term paper.
Right. Yeah.
You can't cram that overnight.
You can't cram for a math test or something like that. Yeah. So there's sort of these programs and ideas that they just inherently take a little more time in order to get the full academic benefit from them. And we would have to define them, define that a little more clearly than what I'm saying here.
Particularly these kind of programs where they are doing work, they're studying, they're doing work, they're doing assignments. I would get I would get texts from my daughter saying, I have homework to finish tonight, but like in Taiwan work to finish that was like their daily work they had to do. She's like, I have to finish this and then I'm going to bed. So they weren't, it's different from when you're going on a trip to Paris and you're going to go do a city tour. And that's fun, and you get to go see the Eiffel Tower and you get to go see a couple different things, and then you're tired and you go to bed. These are different because they are working in the language. And so, the first couple days, frankly, my kid was texting me going, I want to come home. I'm like, no, you'll be fine. And within like 3 days or 4 days, probably by about the fourth day, she had I could tell she had settled into it. If that was a 5-day trip and they were coming home on the weekend after 6 days, she would have just been like closed off, not open to that, to the changes that were happening.
No, I get it.
Yeah, that sort of, drives back to the original question of how do you define a capstone versus just a typical project? And I would say there's kind of at least two things that come to mind. One is volume. It is so much more work and rigor. The volume and rigor is just, this is no joke. Students respect it. They take it seriously. They're doing it 24/7. They're doing it for months a couple of months beforehand, and then finishing it out strong, hopefully finishing their middle school experience with, as Bigwan Sensei said, a bang, instead of oh, that sucked, I'm going to high school. You want to offer them more than that.
I'm not disagreeing with you. So what would be, so let's use the 10 days for an example, right? And so again, centering the kids who are not going. What has been done currently to show that the kids who are staying are not losing that continuity of instruction? And then how do we formalize it, right? So that there are certain criteria that you have to present in a plan, so to speak, right? That, okay, yes, we're going, it's 10 days for all your, if we just use as an example, but for those 10 days, this is what's happening within the building for the kids who are staying. I'm curious as to what has been the plan, and then moving forward, right? As we think about, okay, these are stipulations that a plan has to have and be able to demonstrate.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, actually. My context is the social studies side. Bigwan Sensei does the language side, and we kind of are a team. We have a lot of students. So for one thing, something that you can clearly point to as not disrupting their programming and education is that they are expected to do not an identical, not even analogous though, but the same assignment. They also need to pick a research topic. They need to write a claim in the partner language. They need to conduct surveys. They get paired with Japanese speaking and also American parents or family members or community members who can provide that kind of cultural native kind of source of cultural information. They could ask them about their schooling when they were a kid. How did you feel about school uniforms, for example? They are expected to write the claims, very rigorous linguistic and critical thinking tasks, and they create the same product at the end. They do a trifold poster board where they put their bilingual works. They present it on the same night as all the other students who did participate in the research residencies. So that is something that we can clearly point to as within our context, in-house. There's not like, well, you didn't go, so you don't have to do it. We take every effort to provide them with as close to or an analogous, rigor is the same, except for that they're not being immersed in the same way, but that was their family's choice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And if you're referencing the students who are not JDLI students who are in the classroom, where say 10 JDLI students are in that classroom, the classroom of 30, the 20 that remain there, I think that those instructors are generally the same instructors that have been there, and so continuity or curricular decisions would be to say that they wouldn't do anything or slow down. Again, I would go back to that 2019 complaint. I'm not sure how it arose exactly, but that would be something that you would hope would always happen. I mean, that those teachers would not, and in our building, and I don't know, I'm guessing this has happened in other buildings, we've had that explicit conversation with administrators. Like, the learning continues. And so, I guess, I don't know if, I mean, last year, we actually, as we went forth with Margaret Calvert, we actually had every teacher outline what they were doing during that exact travel time. What were the stated standards they were trying to meet or have students achieve, with specific curriculum, both content and whatever project or whatever assignments that were given. So it's kind of like school continues. It's not like it stops because we leave.
I think it may be helpful just to have like just a really simple basic list, right? Like, for example, like from what I heard in my memory, correct me if I'm wrong, to minimize impact of the students who are not going on the trip, these are the things that are being done. One, the students who are going on the trip have signed a contract that they will keep up with academics, so that the teachers who are not going, you know, obviously at the school, don't have to wait for the kids to come back to teach the things, right? So that's, you know, that's one thing, right? Another thing is, Kelly, I think I remember you telling me there's another, perhaps a Mandarin teacher that also covers when Kojo's gone, right? And who understands the curriculum and knows that. So the students who are not going, this teacher is taking over and making sure they're on track. You know, I think things like that, like very real, like list, may be helpful. Is that kind of what?
Yeah.
Dr. Franco, you're kind of.
Yeah. So we can have a standard of this is what's expected, right? In order to meet this criteria and ensure continuity of instruction, this is the standard.
Mm-hmm.
So that we have some calibration across all the schools, so that, again, if we think about consistency of student experience across the board, like that's, and if we can show that, to me, we won't get, again, just centering where this came from, we won't get, that we can ensure that that's happening, I think that is, it would be good.
Now, would that go in policy or
No.
administrative directive?
That would be in the AG.
But then those could be changed anytime. Administration,
Well,
right?
you know how fast things work here, but.
Oh, okay, not anytime.
Well, and even for me, like, because this is my second year, like that's what I was asking Roseanne about. What has been kind of the process for changing language in AD. I'd have to do some homework on that and kind of see what that looks like. That piece, I think at least on the interim, we could talk a little bit about exceptional. What do we constitute as exceptional, at least in the interim? But until we can, if that's the case, right, visit the AD.
I guess part of my concern is also that I think these groups have been presenting to like the board for years, since 2019, about why it's so exceptional.
2018.
And there hasn't led to any changes in the AD. So I think there's, I mean, I agree with you completely. Like, I think centering the accommodations for students who are not going is the most importance.
Yes.
At the same time, I'm kind of worried that trying to change the AD may not be the permanent solution.
Yeah.
Right? So that I think that's my concern. And if
Sorry, what do you mean won't be the permanent solution?
Well, I think it's what I said too, an AD can be changed, as you said, not quickly. So, but whoever is making the change can do it.
Yeah.
But if Right, like, but if we put language in the policy saying like exceptional cases can be reviewed because of, then that, at least that codifies looking into the exceptional nature of certain trips. And, you know, it may not be this, maybe in the future, there's another amazing opportunity, but because it doesn't fit into the, well, you know, we are going to lose out on that as well, right? So, while I agree with you, I think we should be pursuing AD. I'm also wanting to pursue the policy as well. I think we should do both, if that makes sense, because I don't like putting all my eggs in one basket, right? And I think that there's a fear, especially among these groups here, that going the AD route, well, we've seen this before, and it hasn't worked. And so what's different now, right? And I think that, well, I think what you said about, yeah, sometimes it takes a district a while to do things. So I am hopeful that route will produce something, but just in case.
I wonder if I can add to this, and I'm new this year, but I have good knowledge of DLI. I think, and you said it eloquently, there's a linguistic component, the linguistic immersion that happens, but there's also that cross-cultural piece. And so there's a culturally embedded and immersion piece that happens when, depending on the language, and I'm not, not arguing in favor or against any of this right now, but as an observer, the goals of dual language, one of the goals is that cross-cultural piece. And so I haven't heard anyone say that necessarily yet. Maybe I missed it. Maybe you said it before. But that's where, if we use that as a multiplying effect, kids that go on a trip on this experience, I shouldn't say a trip, then how do we bring that back and multiply that at the school site so that you benefit, but also the kids that stay can benefit from that cross-cultural experience? So not only, if I go to Spain and I learn a lot of cool things there, how do I bring that back to my school and I multiply that experience for peers who didn't have that experience there? I mean, that's just another idea to help sort of really center the kids that are not going, but also to value the kids that are going. Because it's a lot easier to go to Mexico than it is to go to Japan or Vietnam, obviously. So, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just another component of DLI that I think we don't want to miss for this.
Can I just try and, it sounds like you were asking, how can what happens in DLI, you said, be multiplied to benefit students who are also not in DLI?
Well, what happens not only in DLI, but also when you go to, say you go to Japanese experience, how do you bring that back and multiply it at the site? I mean, that should be happening anyway in DLI schools where we multiply some of that, but now it's even magnified because you're bringing this cross-cultural experience that's really, that's really different than what would happen here.
It's an interesting question.
I would say that at least our parent organization, and I've seen ours as well, at the elementary school, okay, you guys are special. At the elementary school level, we have a lot of programming that is focused on the entire school.
Yeah.
Right now, Woodstock is roughly 50% Mandarin immersion, 50% non-Mandarin immersion, neighborhood only. And so the programming that our parent organization puts on is specifically for every child in the school. And we have funds that go to any teacher who wants to utilize it to bring any Chinese language or culture to their classroom, whether that's a neighborhood-only classroom or an immersion classroom. We have events that involve the entire school. And so we do a lot more of that multiplying of culture earlier on. By the time we get to middle school, we become a much smaller component of the school. And so, yeah, the parent organization is able to bring a little bit more of that, and more of the responsibility falls on the teachers at that point. And Kojo, go for it.
So what we did in the past, pre-COVID, when the program was at Hosford. When the students came back, they were working on their 2 capstone projects, the research inquiry project with the poster board and video documentary. And the documentary would be, they would narrate in Chinese, but they'd have English subtitles. And we did gallery walks of both for the non-immersion students in the school before the capstone, as a capstone practice, before the capstone evening for our students. And this is something I would love to do again as we are starting our new program at Harrison Park. But it's a great way to integrate the entire school, and it also allows the students who went on the residency to act as ambassadors to share their experiences.
I would also add that a magnification of that cross-cultural component, I think of it as relationship. We have relationships with schools in Japan who host us. I believe Taiwan, the school that hosted you, is now coming in May.
Yeah.
And when they come here, that's for everybody.
Yeah.
And talk about a magnification. It's quite a, it's exciting for the whole school to host those students from Japan.
So yeah, to add on, we're having it's a school-wide, we're having an assembly to welcome our sister school, and all the students take part. Each advisory class will stand up and say something in Chinese to present, and then to welcome the students, and then they will present a gift to the students. Our students teach, our immersion students teach the non-immersion students the phrases they need to use. So it's full circle.
So Dr. Frango, what, if we are pursuing the AD change route, like what would you need from this group that would help in that? And I don't know if you have, like, what are your ideas for what the next steps are?
Well, I think a few of the things that have been mentioned here are helpful. So, to me, it's just really centering the kids who aren't going. And so if we can come up again with some consistency across the board so that the student experience for the kids who are there maintains and endures, right? And there's no loss of continuity. To me, that's the piece. Like, we need to feel confident in that. And so if it's not tied to, say, a day, right, a limitation, because we're always going to have limitations on days, okay? But it may not necessarily need to be 5 days, right? But so if it's more than 5 days, what is that assurance, right, collectively, that the kids are getting a great experience for us? Like, to me, that's what it is, right? And then we can, go in and kind of craft something that we feel draft-wise that makes a little bit more sense. Given, obviously, we have, again, with what you had mentioned in terms of the experience, true immersion within. Sorry.
You're talking about all the kids that are in the immersion program
Yes.
that didn't go, and the kids in other classes that are missing kids. I
Well, I
guess.
mean, so honestly, I mean, the idea is that the kids who are going, it's like any field trip, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're going to be responsible for
They'll get to it.
and that type of thing. The kids who, right, are in the specific DLI classes, right, who choose not to go, right, what is that level of continuity? Not being able to get this level of experience, but their experience, and there's no other, you can't replicate going to Japan. That's just the reality. But at the same time, how do we ensure and create a semblance of an environment where, they feel like they're not just in a class doing packets, right? And not to say that's what it is, but that, you see what I'm saying? So in hearing like what you said in terms of this is what the kids who are doing, who are staying, we have to make sure that that's replicated across all the schools.
So you're mostly looking at the immersion students to stay behind.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sounds like that.
Well, I mean, it's everybody, because when you lose that many
It's
kids,
everyone.
it's a lot,
Yeah,
right? And so I don't want to just say it's just that, but I'm distinctly,
but that's the focus.
Yeah, this sort of
It's the whole building.
I mean, it is the whole building in a sense. But I guess what I'm saying is, because it really depends, like if you have this many kids going, it could distinctly affect, right? Or not. So the principal in my mind would have to get with the team and say, okay, this is how we are creating this level of consistency across. And if it's one where you're losing that many kids and it affects the whole building, I would expect to see a plan about that.
Yes.
Okay, if it's specific about, okay, it doesn't necessarily want to affect the whole building and this is why it'll be here, then I would want to see that. Right? So it can be tiered in terms of, to me, the level of plans, but I think point being is that there's a very articulate, clearly defined plan that goes along with that. In order for it to be considered a case where we would approve, right? Because that's where really, to me, where that, again, I don't know the history around the exceptional piece, but I think people would need to feel comfortable that that plan exists. And I don't know specifically around the policy piece. I don't like process-wise how you'd want to go about that, but
That policy piece pretty much says that.
it says it.
It
Yeah.
says that.
Kind of like what you said, but shorter.
Yes.
You know, like for example, my ideas for like a policy, I'm just gonna throw out there. You know, again, the policies also have to be very broad,
We do.
right? Very general. So, so for example, like adding a sentence being like exceptions and or flexibility may be granted for blah blah blah, as long as reasonable significant efforts have been made to accommodate the students who are not going, right? Especially if it is, again, I don't want to get too specific, but you know, if it is something that presents certain hardships to certain groups, like for example, traveling to Japan or Taiwan or Vietnam is a hardship, right? It's not something that you can just go in a day. The cross-cultural piece, right?
Time zone crossing.
Time zone crossing.
Right.
Dr. Flores or Mr.
It's just Will Flores.
Will Flores. I like the idea of having the chance to bring something back that, you know, so for example, even putting in wording like benefiting the students in certain ways, right? So like these are the kind of words that's kind of center the students that are not part of this experience. And I think, yeah, like you said, that needs to be the focus. But at the same time, you know, with an opportunity comes the responsibility. So, right. So if we center the responsibility, we can have this exception if. So it sounds like, to me, it would help the staff a lot if the groups came up with the list of all the plans that they have done to minimize impact for the students who have not gone, right? And maybe even come up with a game plan in terms of how to work with a team, like for example, involving the principal, of how to, again, minimize impact.
Sorry, we're talking about two categories of students, right? We're talking about the in-house students and the rest of the school. So
yeah.
I feel like this is something we've already provided
Yeah.
earlier this year.
I thought I saw it all, I know.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the issue with, it wasn't an issue, but you can't change the AD in the moment. And so I think that's the piece, even though the plans, and I haven't seen them, is that, you know, you just can't just go out and change the AD. So, and that's what we go off of, right? Is the AD. And so really, if you want this to be sustainable, because there's language in the policy, is to change the AD.
Would you say that again?
I said, if you want this to be sustainable, I guess I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Kelly.
Kelly. What Kelly had said was that they brought the plans overarchingly, which may have clearly articulated how the support would be for the kids who are staying. The issue is that the AD is the AD, right? And so you can't just change the AD regardless of the plans that you were showing, because it's very specific around like in exceptional cases. That's
So,
what.
so if I understand correctly, you're asking for plans to be presented which show what will happen to the students who don't travel, and an AD can be changed, but you're also saying an AD can't be changed.
Well, it couldn't be changed in the moment. That's what I
Right,
was
and,
saying.
and we recognize that.
Yeah.
We are this year where we are, and we have all figured it out for this year.
Yes.
But what we are really hoping for is a permanent solution for
Yes.
next year
Yes.
and sooner rather than later,
All right.
because as I think it's been called out, we've been involved in these meetings and talking about this since 2018 and before.
I know.
We're tired.
You're not the one. So, because I'm cognizant of time.
So next steps. I will probably want to talk with people on the policy committee about what they think. That will probably be my next step.
That would be really good. And what I can do is, because I'm not sure necessarily the process of rewriting ADs, so I need to do some work. Regards to that. Right? That actually. So it'd be good, Director Wong, if we kind of, like, I'd love to hear, like, what is the sentiment from the policy committee, right? In terms, right? Since we're writing ADs based on policy.
Right. So we'll be in touch. Yeah. So yeah, and if you do find out, just let me know, or if you could forward it, write me a quick note or something like that. Yeah, and then we'll be in touch. 4 minutes left. In parting thoughts, for what I was again, I'm gonna take this and see what the policy committee thinks about what's the best way forward to. And again, I think the goal is a permanent solution, something that not just benefits the DL, the people in this room, but everyone in the future when exceptional cases do arise, right? Because I think the problem with rules is that good rules have exceptions, because that's just, life is messy. So I think, and again, the focus is always on centering the experience of the students who are not able to partake in these. Any parting thoughts or ideas, suggestions?
Something I keep hearing is that we have a real concern around the continuity of curriculum for the students left behind. And that says to me that everyone is thinking it's absolutely, there is not a continuity of curriculum for the students left behind, and they're missing out. And I would argue that we don't have proof that it's not. We don't have proof that it's a problem. We have one complaint from 2018. But we don't have proof that there is a problem with continuity of curriculum. And maybe if it's you or if it's us, to maybe try and get some input from the principals at the schools and find out what the general feeling is. What's the general feeling at Mount Tabor Middle? Like, are there problems? Are they concerned? What's the general feeling at Harrison Park? It's the first year at Harrison Park. Were there complaints? Were there issues? Instead of making the assumption that this is absolutely a problem based on one complaint from 6 years ago, is this really a problem still going? Obviously, we need to be concerned about the students left behind and make sure that in an ongoing manner, as Kojo pointed out, they talk very, and I think Matt also, they talk with the administration. They make sure that they know every teacher is expected to carry on curriculum. But I feel like we just keep going back to this assumption that the teachers aren't carrying on curriculum.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I look at this as, again, with every type of conversation, regardless of what it is, you have to look at it as it's a way to, it's an opportunity, right? In terms of to better the system. I think the reality is like, I don't know if all the kids necessarily would agree that we're staying behind. And so if we keep that frame in mind, creating a system to really ensure that that is happening. And it's not just for, I would say, because this AD and policy encompasses the whole district, right? And so to me, it's an opportunity, right? If we get a little bit more specific, standardized, right, of this is what absolutely will happen, and increasing the consistency of experience across buildings, and to me, that's going to better the system, right? And not just for our research residency kids, but for kids who, who are involved in other things, right? The kids who are left behind. So, so I wouldn't say that was necessarily my assumption overarchingly, but I do think this is a great opportunity to create a better system. That's all I'm looking
I like that. Yep.
But I just want to say I really appreciate the conversation. And nice meeting you.
Thank you. So what is next?
I have a bit of a pivot question. It's very JDLI specific, so I apologize to everyone else who has. Having to pivot our itinerary and our plans has incurred a tremendous cost. Price per head went up $500 per kid, and now we have concerns of being over budget. And we're doing everything we can to cut costs, go to youth hostels. We're driving aggressively to get as much time with homestays as possible, because that means we don't have to pay for hotels or hostels or food. But I wonder, you've mentioned that there's, I forget what it's called, an equity fund or some kind of fund set aside for, it sounds
Field
like,
trip fund.
is it a field trip fund? I can't remember the name, or maybe there's more than one.
It does have the term equity in it.
Yes, the ORR also applied for, but they were denied.
And when I spoke with risk management, we were also told that we were not eligible.
Yes. Given these extenuating circumstances and the real cost, I wonder if we can keep that, if we can explore that to, for this year.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a really good question. I don't even know if it's even budgeted because of all the cuts we're doing. So,
well, it's interesting because
that's
risk
going to be
it was
existent.
offered. I mean, I was asked by risk management, do you want to apply for equity? And I said, sure. But then turned out, as what happened with the Oregon research residency, they weren't eligible. And I don't know the criteria.
Those funds are very limited funds. The intention around creating the equity field trip funds, because we recognized that there were students who could not afford to participate in regular field trips around the community. And there was a portion of that as well that was to look at other opportunities, creating opportunities for students with the most need. And so, for example, we are having this conversation about the programs here, but we have other DLI programs that do not go on field trips, that do not go on, that do not do this type of travel, that, and then outside of DLI, we have students, again, because of their socioeconomic status, are not able to participate in the smallest of field trip. The fund only has $300,000 in it, and it covers, it's intended to cover as many students as possible. So I think it would be a challenge. This is just me speaking. on the top of my head, this is me trying to make sense of what we're discussing right now. I think we can, those dollars economically could go a long way for our most financially needed students with need who are trying to go to a $20 field trip across, the city or somewhere specific. And so again, those dollars were designated for specific activities, not necessarily international trips.
Hence the name, okay. I hope this question doesn't sound like pushback, because it's not intended. Is there like a metric for how, because we were kind of unclear about why we got denied, and it would just be nice to know, like, what is the criteria?
The criteria has been such that it has been set for specific schools.
Oh, okay.
And the schools have been earmarked proportionate to the number of historically underserved students that they have represented in those schools. We looked at the schools with the highest percentage of historically underserved students. And because the funds were so limited, we portioned out, if you will, per pupil, per historically underserved pupil. And so the funds have been designated in that way specifically. Outside of that, again, this is me just kind of sharing information that's sitting on the top of my head, nothing that I've had to dig deep for. You could always, I would imagine that you could always go back to your source to say, hey, could you tell us why we were denied? And maybe that would be some of the rationale.
And if we are able to permanently fix this, whether through AD or policy, right?
Yeah.
Having more flexibility in the timeline.
Yes.
That would help with a lot of the costs.
So much.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
And thank you. That was a very helpful, enlightening answer.
right? If there's no further questions, right? Thank you everyone for coming. This meeting's adjourned.